Girls in coding, a topic that is very important these days and something that's on the minds of just about everybody in educational technology. We have a global conversation with Tara Linney next on the EdTech vlog. Hi, I'm Dr. Matt Harris, and this is the EdTech vlog. Today, we're joined by Tara Linney, who's going to talk to us about girls in coding. Now, Tara is coming to us live, well, recorded, honestly, from Paris, and as you know, I'm in Singapore. So, Tara, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you come from and kind of how did you get into this topic?
Where to begin? So I am an ed tech coach here at the American School of Paris, and I've been in education now. This is my ninth year. I was previously in Singapore, throughout the US. This is my first year in Paris. And the topic of code equity really came about when I was working at an all-girls school in Washington, D.C. and started a girls coding club. And I just saw like all the great aha moments and this sisterhood that was created of like really empowering girls to understand their full potential. When I left that school, I went to another school and then saw that boys were the ones, because I was like now in this boy-girl environment, and I saw that boys were the ones who were being called on, and boys were the ones who were speaking up and who had the right answer. And so I decided, let's look at what's going on here and why there's this major disparity, and to see what we can do as educators to change that and to really level out the playing field.
Now, of course, you're referring to your book, which is awesome. So Tara has written this wonderful book called Code Equity: Keying Girls into Coding, which it's an excellent book because it talks about this gender equity piece of coding, but then it also discusses kind of the how-tos of getting girls into coding by connecting it directly with classroom instruction. And you've talked to us a little bit about your inspiration, but give us a little bit more about the book. Like, what do people get by reading the book? What are the main takeaways?
So a lot of it is, it's not just about how do you integrate coding into the curriculum
Mhm.
and how do you teach the subject, but a lot of it is around what our practices are and what our mindsets are. So when we're looking at a class with an even number of boys and girls, who are we calling on? Are we giving boys and girls an opportunity to work together, or are we pitting them against one another? Because if you look at what the problems are with the tech world and the professional world right now with these different tech companies, you see that there's not a lot of women there.
Mm.
And a lot of that starts from a very, very young age. So when girls are in elementary school all the way up through middle school, they'll start to get engaged in things and then just lose it. And part of that is because of examples that they see of role models and the way in which they're treated compared to boys.
Mm.
So, are we calling on girls for math questions? Are girls being treated the same thing in terms of PE expectations? And when we're in those technology filled environments, who are we going to show students how to do something or to fix a problem? Are we always calling on the boys? So in the book, I like to include different strategies of how we can change little tweaks in our practice to make it a more equitable learning environment for both genders.
That's interesting because you're kind of referring to something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, of these barriers to girls getting into coding. And it's not just coding, right? It's computer science, it's software engineering. I have a real problem with the word STEM. I'm not going to go into that now, but and you and I have talked about that as well. But so you've talked about some of these things directly related to the way that the genders are treated differently within the classroom. Are there other barriers to getting girls into coding to start with? And then also, how do we get them to stick with it? Which is another issue of, we've introduced them to coding, but they don't stick with it to kind of further lengths that the boys are doing. So what are those other barriers that they're running into?
So a lot of it has to do with when we're doing coding in different classes. So say that we're doing coding in science class, or say that we have just a coding class. Is it all about doing cool things with robots? Or is it about creating a game where it's just fun? And so certain groups of students, just as a whole, excel in that because they like making games? Or is there a bigger purpose? When you look at things like the Sustainable Development Goals, these are the 2030 goals, and it's really the responsibility of everybody who's alive today, including young students as young as kindergarten, to look at what these goals are to make the world a better place.
Mhm.
So why not integrate things like that into these different coding activities so that there's purpose behind what's being learned rather than just learning it for the sake of learning it? When girls and boys see purpose behind what they do, they're more likely to buy in and to stick with it because they can instantly see, whoa, this is how this links with this. And whoa, I made a difference by doing this one thing.
So is it kind of like contextualizing and giving more value as opposed to the procedural elements? Is that what works better with girls? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Definitely.
Okay.
So it's the value added. So what's the point in us doing this activity at all? Are we just doing it because it's in the curriculum? Or is it something where we can teach somebody else, even if it's teaching students of another grade how to do the same thing? There's
Yeah.
got to be that communication and that networking in with whatever the activity happens to be.
Well, that's fascinating. Now I'm going to ask you a tough question that I'm really interested to hear your opinion about this. There are gender specific games and toys and elements related to coding, and some of them are geared towards girls, towards feminine members of society. Is that a positive thing, a negative thing? What's your opinion about that?
It all depends. So I say it all depends because when you look at those different gendered toys and games, they're meant for young girls. They're not necessarily meant for teenagers. I think that it's important that we get girls to buy into this idea of it's okay that I'm not perfect, and it's okay if I don't get something right away. And it gives them this opportunity in gendered toys and things like that to be able to try something and feel safe in failing. I think that what happens is as students, girls and boys, get into middle school and even high school, you start to see those gendered toys go away, and they're working with more like physical computing devices that are not gendered at all. And it's because those gendered toys allow them the ability to be comfortable and to build up confidence in something in a safer environment than something that is for everyone.
Right. Another thing that gender studies show us quite a bit is this notion of lack of representation within the field for girls. And I know that this is a very big point for you about girls having role models in computer science and coding. And so who are those role models that schools can draw upon as someone to use as an exemplar for girls to get further into coding or computer science?
So there's a lot. It really depends on what subject area you're looking at, or if you're just looking at computer science.
Mhm.
Um, One site that I really like is madewithcode.com, and it's something that Google set up back in 2014 when they first published their employment numbers. And on madewithcode.com, if you go into the mentors section, it has short little 2-minute long videos of different women and girls who've done really cool things with coding. And what happens is when young girls see that, they're like, whoa, the woman who works for Pixar designs movies using coding. She does dance with coding. Like they see these possibilities that they can't imagine otherwise. And then it starts to allow them to create their own possibilities of, whoa, I can actually do this as a career, or I can actually make this cool thing. And one thing that's nice about those videos in particular is, yes, they highlight women and girls, but it's something that the boys can benefit from seeing too,
Hmm. Why
because
is
it
that?
shows them. Hmm?
Why is that?
Because it shows them that it's not just this boy in a dungeon
Mm.
type of like basement environment coding away on his computer doing nothing. They see the other side. And when young boys see that girls can do this too, then that sets them up to be more equitable in their hiring practices when they get older. And this works for girls and boys if they see that it's more of an even playing field and less of a girls against boys thing.
Gotcha. Now you use a word there, equitable, and that kind of refers back to your book here, right? So code equity, and you specifically chose the word equity, and this is a word in education that has a very specific meaning. And I'm not sure everybody knows the difference between the word equity and equitable, which are not really the same thing. Why did you choose the word equity? What does that mean for you and maybe in the context of the book?
So there's equity and then there's equality. And
Okay.
yep, oftentimes like we talk about equality, like everybody is equal. But is every like, when we look at two people, are they equal? So equity is all about giving people what they need in order to be successful, whereas equality is giving them the same thing. Like say that you're giving a test. All right, everybody, you have 10 minutes to complete this test. Okay, maybe some students need more time. Maybe they need questions read to them. Maybe they need a different testing environment altogether. Equity is all about giving them what they need in order to be successful, which means not treating everybody the same because everybody is not the same.
Okay. And is that something of need and value specifically to girls in coding? Like, is that something that's talked about specifically, this notion of equity and need?
Definitely. Because when you talk about girls in coding, a lot of it is a mindset thing.
Hmm.
Like, we teach boys that you can fall down and just get back up and, wipe it off or whatever. But with girls, we're like, oh no, be careful, be careful. Like, you've got to be careful. You've got to be safe. You've got to be pretty. You've got to stay within the lines.
Right.
We have to break that. And breaking a culture is not something that happens like that. And it's not something that's easy. That's why this whole idea of equity is super important because it's not a change that's going to happen overnight. And it's something that really has to happen as a culture, not just a learning culture, but also like a whole societal culture.
That's right. It's almost like there's a change in climate that needs to start now within individual pockets that hopefully will change a culture within the broader space. Are you finding some success in changing those climates within the classrooms you're working in?
Definitely. Definitely. What happens is, so I run a girls coding club for our lower school, and it started off as just like 4 girls, and now it's become way more than 4 girls. We're at somewhere in the teens. But what's been really interesting is from those 4 girls, they then invited their friends who invited their friends. And we start each meeting with snack time, but then also checking out one of the mentor videos and having like a group discussion on what did you learn from this and how does this relate to what you're experiencing? Because like with the mentors, they talk about what their life was like and like struggles that they face now or that they faced when they were a kid. And so the girls are very reflective on how they're treated. And what happens from those conversations is that I'm able to then go back to the teachers and say, this came up. What can we do to make it so that the girls are challenged to do as many sit-ups or push-ups as the boys, or they get as much soccer time, or we're making sure that we're not saying something to them and not saying the same thing to boys.
Right.
So now, like if I see kids sliding down the stairs, I'm like, be careful, boys and girls.
Are there some other how-to things? Because it sounds like this girls coding club is a great starting off point to then get girls in coding more into the classroom and to get this sticking with piece as a group activity. Are there some other key takeaways from your girls coding club that other people could use in their own schools?
Definitely. Strategically pairing students together regardless of gender. So
Okay.
our pair programming activities are really great. And this could go on in any class, whether it's through pair programming or doing something on the computer, where you have the driver and the navigator, and that teaches students how to collaborate with one another and how to communicate. And pairing them not based on ability, but instead more so on personality. Because if you're always pairing like the top students with the top students and the bottom students with the bottom students, then that's not really equitable because you're pairing same and same. If you do it more based on putting the quiet students together or putting, similar interest students together, like, oh, I like chocolate, me too, things like that, then they have some commonality, which allows them some point to collaborate on.
That's excellent. Now I'm going to shift gears just a little bit around this notion of coding, because I have said many times, I said it on the blog, I talk about it. I think coding is not very important. And I've said that repeatedly. I know, gosh, oh, I know, you're so shocked. Because I think it is the grammar of the language that needs to be learned. And the language that needs to be learned, in my opinion, is computational thinking and design thinking that have a greater reach than the coding itself. But I don't think a lot of people understand, and maybe it's my American accent, I don't know, but, well, you have an American accent, so you're going to know better. But what's the difference between computational thinking and coding?
Okay, so computational thinking, the main thing is that it has the thinking word in it. So computational thinking is how we approach problem solving. And it sounds scary because there's a lot of letters, like they're very compound words, right? So like computational thinking, that was a lot of claps. But with computational thinking, it's basically how we approach problem solving to begin with. So whether that's giving directions to a class of, here's how we're going to do like this lesson, and you're breaking it down and saying step by step, and if you leave out a step, then it doesn't work. Or if it's looking at a math problem and saying, here's how we're going to do step-by-step division. Computational thinking, it's just the way in which we think. You can think of it like thinking like a computer. So do you want to like let the computer do everything for you? Which, I mean, maybe people are saying yes. Or do you see some relevance and importance in being able to diagnose what the problems are by looking at the whole? It's almost like going to the doctor and saying, I don't feel good. Okay. And then the doctor says, well, what are your symptoms? With computational thinking, it's being able to like figure out what those symptoms are so you can verbalize them, even if you can't fix them. So whereas coding is more like the hands-on practice of coding and doing and creating, computational thinking is the process.
So then maybe we can finish with a tough question, kind of combining these together, because if the coding is the how and the computational thinking is kind of the what, is the way you're somewhat describing it. When we think about girls, is it more important to get them to do the coding or to learn the computational thinking? Let me go a little more in depth on what I mean by that question. Because the way that I think about this is, in the future, as they get into careers in the digitized world and university, those computational thinking skills are what are going to give them a greater leg up career-wise. But the coding hands-on application piece perhaps gives them entree into the field that will have the girls stick longer. So how do you approach that from a planning perspective? Are you aiming for them to get into computational thinking? Are you putting a lot of push at the coding phase to get them a bedrock of knowledge? Like, is it girls should code or girls should think computationally? I don't know how to say that.
So that's a tongue twister.
Yeah.
It's both. So when I reflect on whenever I've engaged with a student, girl or boy, who's gotten frustrated with a program not working, which was actually just this week. I had one student who, like, they couldn't figure out the Wonder Woman, like how to make her do what she was supposed to. And she's like, what am I missing? And that's the frustration part. And what happens is with computational thinking, you're working through that frustration. So my coaching to her was not, okay, you move this here, you move that there, was not telling her the answer, but instead, let's read this as though it's a sentence. Does this sentence make sense? Let's put ourselves into the shoes of the character that we're trying to control. If I go step by step, am I getting through? And how am I getting through, but my character is not? Are my steps in the physical world the same as those in the virtual world for my character? So I think a lot of the teaching and a lot of the feedback that we give is the computational thinking aspect, whereas a lot of the work that the student does themselves is a mix of the coding and the computational thinking. And when we're supporting students, it should be around not necessarily the coding, but how to decompose a problem and make sense of it.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. Well, people probably want to know where to get the book. Again, lovely book. and connect with you, how do people find you online and how do they find the book?
Okay, so the book is on Amazon. I'll also have some copies at conferences that I go to and whatnot throughout the year. You can get a hold of me on Twitter. I'm just my name now, so just at Tara Linney. I also have an email, and yeah, those are the main ways.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been spectacular. And for everybody else that's listening to this, this global conversation interview, you're going to see at the bottom of the screen here that there are two buttons. One of them is to subscribe to the channel, because as you know, we're doing several of these conversations with kind of influential ed tech people like Tara, talking about really critical topics. So please subscribe to the channel and engage in some of the conversation there. Also, I share a lot of these concepts around coding, around my connections with brilliant people like Tara here through Twitter. So please connect with me through Twitter. My handle is @MattHarrisEdD. And again, let's use it to have a kind of discussion here. This was a spectacular conversation. I really appreciate it. Girls in coding is such a topical issue right now, and I'm glad we had a chance to discuss it and kind of continue that conversation. It feels like there are a million miles to go, but we're starting to go down that path in a more purposeful way. So I really appreciate that. Tara, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. And for everybody else, have a great day.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. That was great.